Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us straight out of the Judge Vault, and it's very important for you to understand this interaction if you play the modern deck that uses these cards. Amy controls a wall of roots with 4 -0/-1 counters on it, and she wants to play an Eldritch Evolution. Is it possible for Amy to make a green mana with her wall of roots and also have it be the creature that she sacrifices to play this sorcery? Alright, so the first piece of information that we're going to need to answer this question is a little bit of information about how spells work. Anytime you want to cast a spell, like Eldritch Evolution in a game of Magic, then you have to follow a specific sequence of steps in a specific order. Now, for our purposes, the two most important of those steps would be the one where you get a chance to activate mana abilities, and another one that comes later, which is where you actually pay the cost to cast the spell. Now that we've got that sorted, let's talk a little bit about state-based actions. The thing that makes creatures with 0 or less toughness go into their owner's graveyard is a state-based action. Now, I went into a lot more detail about how this works in my video where I talked all about state-based actions, but the important thing that we need to know is that if you have state-based actions that come up in the game doesn't take care of those on a continuous basis. Rather, there's only certain specific times when the game is allowed to perform state-based actions. And it turns out that in the middle of casting a spell is not one of those times that the game is able to do that. Rather, if you have any state-based actions come up during the process of casting a spell, then that means that the game has to wait until the entire process, all of the steps in that sequence we talked about, is completed before it can do any of those state-based actions. So with that, we have the answer to our question. Amy is able to make this play exactly the way she hopes. All she needs to do is say that she's casting the Eldritch Evolution, and then during the step where she gets to activate mana abilities, she would activate the Wall of Roots ability to make a green, and then the game is not able to perform the state-based action of putting the 0 toughness Wall of Roots into its owner's graveyard yet. Rather, it has to wait until the entire process of casting Eldritch Evolution has been completed. So we just move on to the next step in that process, which would be the part where Amy has to pay the costs. She already has that green in her mana pool from activating the Wall of Roots ability, so she can use that as part of the 1 green mana cost, and she still has the Wall of Roots creature in play, which means it's still going to be valid for her to sacrifice that creature. In fact, that's probably a great creature to sacrifice, given that it's going to the graveyard, whether she likes it or not. So that's the way that this play works. And when Birthing Pod was legal in Modern, this play came up a lot, because you would be able to sacrifice the Wall of Roots to Birthing Pod while also making mana to help you activate that Birthing Pod. Of course, we don't have Birthing Pod in Modern anymore, but we do have Eldritch Evolution, and the trick works exactly the same way. Also, another card that these decks tend to run would be Chord of Calling. So let's talk a little bit about how Chord of Calling would work in this situation. Let's say that we have the Wall of Roots with the 4 counters on it already, and we wanted to make a mana with Wall of Roots and also tap to convoke it. Would this be possible? And it turns out it is, in exactly the same way, for exactly the same reasons. We're going to activate the mana ability of the Wall of Roots to make a green, and because state-based actions are not going to put the Wall of Roots into its owner's graveyard until after the entire process of casting the Convoke spell has been completed, then that means it's still going to be around in play when Convoke is asking if we want to tap any creatures. So that's the way that that trick works for those types of cards. Now, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that would be the way that something like, for example, a Wild Cantor would interact in this sort of situation. As you can see, Wild Cantor is actually a little bit different because it specifically says that you have to sacrifice it as part of the cost to activate its mana ability. So let's see how that might change the answer to some of the questions that we talked about before. First of all, if we wanted to have an Eldritch Evolution where we sacrificed the Wild Cantor for mana and also sacrificed it as the creature, well, that's not really going to work out very well. I'm sure the Wild Cantor really regrets that it has but 1 life to give for this spell, but that's the way it is. You could sacrifice the Wild Cantor to make a mana, or you could sacrifice it as the additional cost to cast the Eldritch Evolution, but you cannot get both benefits with only 1 sacrifice, so that trick is off the table. It turns out that it's also not possible for you to sacrifice the Wild Cantor for mana and also convoke with it. The reasons why are a little bit more technical, but I did make an entire video on exactly this question a while back, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out and see exactly why that trick does not work. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.